We are another week closer to the NFL draft, and it's another week where on RotoViz OT we are getting on one of our absolute favorite NFL drafter, I guess, college prospects coming into the NFL, analyst people to go to, and that is Matt Hicks. And he's back on. We mentioned this with a few other people, Shawn, we've had on. It's like a yearly. We have our core guys that we go back to each time because they're so good at what they do. And today we're leading off with wide receivers, but we've got a lot to talk about, and I'm sure the direction will organically maybe even go in different directions as we run through it. But Matt, kicking things off, thanks for jumping back on to RotoViz OT.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back. It's an honor to get I think this is year 3 of being able to jump on around this time of year, and I feel very honored that I got the wide receivers. So it's a great class this year. There's a lot to get into, so I'm excited for our conversation.
How are you ready to go? Shawn has been kind enough to put the list of topics and questions together here, and he's done that for the previous guests as well and done an awesome job kind of creating a nice narrative throughout the shows. Excited for this one, Shawn?
Yeah, it's going to be great. I mean, I find something out that I didn't know and is crucial, does help me tweak my understanding. One of the things we're trying to do here is fill out kind of our background on some of these prospects and better understand how they've moved through their careers, because we can look at the stats. I think we do a pretty good job with the analysis there. You know, we always love to push the RotoViz rookie guide, which we've got a lot of great feedback for this season. But I love these shows because I get to learn from some of the best college football draft analysts, prospect analysts, people in the industry. So I'm fired up. Colm, get us into it here.
Yeah, so we're going to jump into wide receivers. And before we do that, just you can follow Matt if you want on Twitter, on X, whatever people want to call it now, at the FF_educator. And you can also check out the rookie big board. Lots of content over there in video format as well. So I'd recommend that. I have to check something here as we kick this off. We are removed from April Fool's Day, but I was taken aback for a brief moment of time in terms of your quarterback rankings. Can I confirm April Fool's joke with moving Penix up to QB1?
Yes, that was an April Fool's joke. I am very much out on Michael Penix. So I left it without comment. I didn't respond to any of the comments just to really lean into the joke.
Yeah, because I did go to check the comments to see if I could glean any, but April 1st, I thought, yeah, this is where we're going with this one. But let's jump into wide receivers. We'll talk quarterback later in the week. But Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers, they are up at the top of the tree here. And we've had a number of guests on over the last couple of weeks. Myself and Shawn have talked about them as well, and excited about the prospect of some of these top-end wide receivers and what they can actually do in the NFL. The running back class has been talked about as being weaker than maybe we would like, but the wide receivers and some of the quarterbacks are definitely there to get excited about. So break down those two players for us stylistically, and then when we go to the profiles, which of those offers more upside, more flexibility, and I guess more floor at the NFL level. And it might be a case that one of them offers more floor versus one of them offering more upside. But those two guys in particular, are excited to get your thoughts on them.
Yeah, it's at this point in the draft, I've noticed a lot of conversation around Marvin Harrison Jr. versus Malik Nabers. I think at the end of the day, the answer is yes. I think we have two really strong prospects here. You compare these two guys to the wide receiver prospects over even the last two draft class, you're probably going to be looking at these two right about at the top if you were to combine them all as prospects. So we have two really solid profiles to go off of here. Marvin Harrison Jr., he is my wide receiver 1. I have him one spot higher than Malik Nabers. I love the way that he navigates the field. He's fluid. He gets off the line of scrimmage very well. Defensive backs really struggle to keep up with him. I know we talk about straight line speed. He hasn't tested at all, which makes folks a little bit worried about his speed in his 40 time. On tape, the speed is absolutely there. Defensive backs struggle to keep up with him when he's moved downfield, I should say. But his best trait for me is his ball skills. He has excellent hands. He has excellent ball tracking ability. He's got a great catch radius. He reacts to the ball well. And we did have to see him, produce with different quarterbacks at Ohio State, one of those being Kyle McCord last year, which absolutely gave him more of a challenge than when he was catching balls from CJ Stroud. So you see him be able to win and produce with two different style quarterbacks. That for me is a big win. Marvin Harrison Jr. for me is more of a traditional X type prospect. I think you can put him along the boundary. I know there's conversation about whether or not he's ready to be outside. I think he's ready to play along the boundary early on in his career. I think he can dominate with good body positioning, with those ball skills, like I mentioned, all around a really high floor prospect here. I wouldn't say he's the most technically sound route runner, but I think he does everything very well. He displays the ability to work the full route tree. He's got sharp footwork. I think he's got a really nice clean release off the line of scrimmage. And he especially wins moving into those deep routes. So there's no such thing as a can't miss prospect, but I think Marvin Harrison Jr., if you're thinking about floor, if you're thinking about making a safe investment on a rebuilding dynasty team, I think it's going to be pretty tough to see a scenario where things are going to go wrong for Marvin Harrison Jr. When you compare him to Malik Nabers, you're going to get a little bit smaller of a frame. So Marvin Harrison, 6'3", 210. Malik Nabers, 6'0", 200. So a little bit smaller of a frame. I really like Nabers' explosiveness. So I think that's where he has an edge over Marvin Harrison Jr. I'd call Marvin Harrison Jr. fluid. Malik Nabers for me is explosive. He's got a really clean release. He separates right off the line of scrimmage, which is something I love for my wide receiver prospects. The release off the line of scrimmage is something that I have found translates very well to the next level. It's one of the things I loved about Chris Olave coming out. It's one of the reasons I was higher on him than consensus. Sharp footwork for Malik Nabers, physical hands near the catch point. So although he's not the biggest guy, you almost add an extra inch and a half in terms of catch radius, just in terms of his ball prowess, his aggressiveness going after the ball. He doesn't let it come to him. He's fast. All right. He gets to top speed instantly. So there's different ways to be fast. Malik Nabers is fast right off the line of scrimmage. He closes space quickly. He's got good vertical ability. He's got sticky hands when he goes up and gets the ball. And I think after the catch is what gets a lot of folks excited about him as well. He's a twitchy athlete. He's elusive after the catch. Definitely has that big yak ability. In terms of route running, I think Malik Nabers is a little bit more on the raw side, but it's impressive how effective he is at gaining separation and working through routes without being technically sound. So if we get him coached up a little bit at the next level, that suggests there's even more ceiling to Malik Nabers. So I know you were talking about floor versus ceiling. I think they both have good ceilings, but you could make the argument that Malik Nabers has even more room to grow, where I think Marvin Harrison Jr. has developed. I think we understand what he is, and that's a very good player.
How much emphasis do you put on to these prospects coming out in terms of the rawness factor? And, it could obviously be a concern on one side, but then you mentioned also the room to grow, and how much, I guess, the coachability of the player comes into the factor, but the likes of a Nabers coming in a little bit more raw to make that leap at the NFL with the additional coaching.
It really depends for me what they're raw in, right? So a guy like Malik Nabers being raw in route running, I'm not as concerned about it. If you see the way a lot of successful wide receivers are deployed in the NFL, especially if you're thinking about success in terms of fantasy football production, they don't need to run the full route tree, right? There's plenty of guys who get by running a sharp slant with the ability to go downfield on the vertical, work a nice comeback route, maybe get a whip, maybe get a dig in there. You don't necessarily need to be the most technically sound route runner right away in the NFL. I think oftentimes what NFL teams are doing with wide receivers now is they're identifying where that wide receiver fits into their offense, and they're going to have them run a select 3-4 routes primarily. And as long as they can get that down, they don't need to be able to work the whole tree. Now, if a wide receiver has suspect hands, right? If they're if they only have one real season of starting and their hands are suspect, that's something I won't overlook. That was my big red flag on Quentin Johnston last year. I refused to draft him because of those suspect hands. So there's kind of a difference there, a little bit of nuance in terms of where they're raw, but route running is not one that I'm concerned about as much.
Matt, as we go to the second tier here, mine has kind of crystallized at this point, perhaps a little bit differently than where we expect these guys to come off the board in the draft. Odunze, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, break down these guys for us and fill us in on whether it's wildly off base to have this as the tier 2.
Yeah, you're pretty close to me in terms of my tier too. You're only missing one guy, but all three of these guys are in my second tier. And I'll start with Troy Franklin because I'm a big Troy Franklin fan. I think I might be his biggest fan out there. Pre-draft, he's my wide receiver 3. We're going to see about landing spot because it's very close between him, Brian Thomas Jr., and Rome Odunze. But I love Franklin. I think he wins very well over the boundary and over the middle of the field. There's a lot of versatility to his game. Great ball tracking. He has good athleticism, a good body positioning to win along the boundary really consistently. And again, he's 6'1", 176, but he was shredding up along the boundary. He separates consistently with his speed. But this is a big point of clarification because a lot of folks are worried about speed wide receivers, guys who are just speed wide receivers. Franklin separates as well through his routes. He's got an understanding of angles. He's got an understanding of body positioning, and he's got really convincing footwork to his game as well. He has nice double moves off the line of scrimmage, so he shows the ability to win against off coverage and releases. And then he's not just a pure straight line runner. He's got smooth speed. He's fluid. He builds that speed as he works downfield and gets that separation. And for a guy who's 6'1", 176, guys, I never see a defensive back within 3 yards of him unless the ball is severely underthrown, which did happen at times with Bo Nix at Oregon. But for the most part, Troy Franklin was really separating consistently. And I think he does run a pretty full route tree. He's got a dangerous post route. He breaks off a mean slant, which I love for my wide receiver prospects for fantasy production. He wins downfield with a really convincing deep curl. He uses his speed to keep defensive backs honest with that. So I like Troy Franklin a lot. I know folks are concerned, 6'1", 176. And I'm not saying he's Devonta Smith, but what I am saying is he wins in a similar way that Devonta Smith wins, and it's relying on separation and being able to do that consistently. I think Troy Franklin's going to translate pretty well to the NFL. And if we get that late first-round landing spot, there's some really juicy landing spots now. Buffalo, of course, being even better of an option now. So that's Troy Franklin. And then you're going to compare him to a guy like Rome Odunze, who is a little bit more of that, I would say, consensus, wide receiver 3 selection here. And I like Odunze. I don't seem to like Odunze as much as everybody else. So I'm going to preface this by saying I do like him. I think he's going to be a good wide receiver 2 in your fantasy football lineup. He's twitchy. He uses good athleticism. He has good short area quickness. He's another guy who gets the top speed very well off the line of scrimmage. Vertical athleticism helps him win at the catch point. We see that a lot with Rome Odunze, right? He wins at the catch point. He's got good hands. He's got good ball tracking ability, and he's got good body positioning. After the catch, he can scrap for those extra yards, so he's got a little bit of that yards after catch ability as well. Here's my thing with Odunze. Here's my flag for him. I don't see as much consistent separation to his game. He'll get jammed against press coverage in against Pac-12 defensive backs. Those are not the defensive backs you want to, get jammed up against. It's a lower caliber defensive back, right? And then you will see a lot of the times he does rely on contested catches to get the job done. A guy like Rashad Bateman had a very similar profile going out, and it's one of the reasons I faded him. Where I do give Rome Odunze some credit, though. So, I actually went back, I rewatched Rome Odunze film after I watched Michael Penix's film, because after watching Michael Penix's film, I realized just how inaccurate Michael Penix was. And I think Rome Odunze was doing a lot of heavy lifting. I don't know that all of those contested catch situations were his fault. So although that is a big concern for me, there's justification, there's context behind it. So I like Odunze. I think he'll be best as a wide receiver 2 in an NFL offense. If he does get drafted as an X receiver, I think folks will be very excited about that. But I will proceed with a little bit of caution, especially when he's in matchups where he's pulling, top tier NFL defensive backs, like the top coverage on opponents. So I like Odunze. I don't love him as much as everyone else. And I like Xavier Worthy too. Xavier Worthy is one of these guys, playing in the Devy community. We've been talking about him since he broke out early as a true freshman with super great production at Texas. He wins with speed and explosiveness before and after the catch. So there is some definite versatility to his game. Sharp first step off the line of scrimmage, and he will shoot downfield. Really great at accelerating. Of course, we saw that 40 time. He does display the ability to gain yards after the catch. He's quick. He's elusive. He's got good field vision, too. I don't know if Xavier Worthy's field vision is given enough credit, but he does close space quickly. He can move east to west just as much as he can run downfield. Not the biggest catch radius. He's 5'11", 165. So I think we need to be realistic about the way that he's going to earn targets at the next level. But I do think he could be a 60, 70 target guy. And we're seeing more and more of these rookie wide receivers are coming out and they're averaging 14, 15 yards per catch. You know, a guy like Tank Dell, right, came out and was a downfield threat early on in his NFL offense. So I think there's a lot to like about Xavier Worthy. I think he can win at all three levels of the field, which gives him some good versatility, but you can't always say for a guy who's 5'11", 165. They all bring a little bit of their own flavor and they all fall in the same tier for me. So the easy answer in April is to say, we'll see how these landing spots shake out. But the real answer for me is it's going to be value, right? Xavier Worthy, I'm seeing him go off of drafts in the second round. He may end up the best value of this group. Odunze, I think you're going to have to pay up for him. And Troy Franklin, I think is going to be a really nice value as well in the back end of the first round.
Well, Matt, as we look at this next group here, Brian Thomas versus Adonai Mitchell, one of the things here with Mitchell is that there are quite a few sort of production red flags. But you had mentioned Penix as it relates to Odunze. And, you know, as I'm doing my quarterback analysis, one of the things that jumped out is that Penix does look very poor compared to the other guys who are sort of in consideration at the top. Obviously not doing as much work on these guys who are not coming out here, but something that does pop up from time to time is that despite making the college football semifinals, I mean, Quinn Ewers does not look very good. And is that accurate, or are these three guys who look like top draft prospects actually not doing the work? I mean, where's the causation? Is the quarterback the issue, or is it the fact that just with three guys you're going to have production spread? Or, I mean, does Mitchell himself need to be a lot better? And it can obviously be a combination of those things.
Yeah, that might be the first time I've heard Quinn Ewers and accurate put into the same sentence. So I think you've got a little bit of a good lead there on it. The thing about Quinn Ewers at Texas, in terms of my film analysis on him, is, you know, there's games where he puts it all together. There's games where he's got great mechanics. He's got pure arm talent. I think that's really the foundation of Quinn Ewers' upside. He's got an excellent arm. You know, he shows that ability, that Caleb Williams type, that Pat Mahomes type ability to adjust those arm angles, find those passing lanes that seemingly don't exist. And he can push the ball downfield, adjust velocity well. When his mechanics are together, it's looking great. There's other times where he's under pressure and the game just collapses around him. He starts making poor decisions. The accuracy is off. So it's a real roller coaster with Quinn Ewers, which is why I think it's hard to nail that down. The other thing when we're talking about AD Mitchell in particular, right, is Mitchell's also a hot and cold player. So, you know, there you could look at that and say that games where Quinn Ewers is better, that's where Mitchell was able to put up 6 receptions for 120 yards. And then there's other games where Mitchell's going out there and he's putting up, you know, less than 5 receptions for less than 50 yards. So, you know, in terms of quarterback play, if you were to compare Brian Thomas to, if you were to compare Adonai Mitchell to a guy like Brian Thomas, you would definitely have to, you know, factor in that Quinn Ewers was a much less consistent passer.
When people are looking at his profile, are they giving enough credit to what he did in his freshman year at Georgia? When you consider like all the guys who were there fighting for, you know, scraps and, you know, an efficient, but maybe, you know, not, you know, massively high volume passing offense.
Yeah, you know, I really wish these guys, like if you were a 4-star wide receiver, stop going to Georgia, right? Because it muddles everything up. I don't think they get the level of development that they expect. They certainly don't get the level of volume that we want from them as a Devy player. So you're right, relative to his teammates. I'm remembering Pickens was on that team, right? I think there was another good Georgia wide receiver that I'm forgetting that was on that roster as well. He did have solid production, but the story of Mitchell's production over the course of his career, right, has been just what I described earlier. Whether it was at Georgia or even at Texas, it's been inconsistent. And that's the one thing that really, it's tough for me to get past when I'm trying to evaluate him, because a big piece of the rating that I put on these players is their realistic projection that I can put on them. And if I don't feel that the targets are going to be there, it might be a struggle for me to justify him as even a back end first round selection. So I don't know. I struggle with Mitchell, but you're right. You can put context behind it for Georgia and understand why. I don't know that you can justify that same context with Texas. Like, I know they had Xavier Worthy in there, but they were throwing the ball enough, especially once Jonathan Brooks went down. They were throwing the ball enough to justify two guys, producing consistently.
If both of these guys go in the first round, are you looking at Mitchell in the first round of the reality draft? Are you looking at Mitchell as, a decent arbitrage playoff Thomas who has his own kind of red flags, or you have them pretty separated?
I have them pretty separated at this point. So I have both. So I actually have Brian Thomas projected in my draft capital range of 11 to 20 overall. So I think he's going to go right there in that mid first round. And then I have AD Mitchell projected in my 21 to 50 range. So I think if he goes in the first round, he'll sneak into those 20s. If I had to guess, I think that's where he's going to go. So I do have a gap in their draft capital. And I do have a gap between where they are in my rankings. Right now, Brian Thomas is 10 overall on the rookie big board. And I have Adonai Mitchell down there actually at 18 overall. So I'm relatively low on him right now. And I think they're going to end up costing a pretty similar price. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is somebody who is a more consensus guy that folks like, where Adonai Mitchell, I found there's folks who love him and folks who are out on him. So it's going to depend on the league, of course. But I imagine there's going to be somebody in most leagues who's willing to take Mitchell 108, 109, especially if he gets first round draft capital. Whereas I think Brian Thomas will probably go 110, 111 in almost every league.
Two players now that performed surprisingly well in Dave Cabin's regression tree and analysis up on rotoviz.com. Those players being Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan. Is there anything that we need to know about their careers? What has got them to this point? And is it a case that maybe are we as a community collectively sleeping on them, or is there what's your outlook for them at the NFL level?
Yeah, Jalen McMillan has had a real interesting college career. So Devy folks were in on Jalen McMillan early on when he committed to Washington. McMillan was a part of this early commitment run of high-profile wide receiver recruits that had committed to the Jimmy Lake Washington team. So not the current, I guess not even the most former coaching regime. So 2 ago, when they were really poor, and remember, for Devy folks that are listening, this is the class that Sam Heward committed to, and he was supposed to be, the next big thing at Washington, the quarterback, who I think is playing at Cal Poly now, if I'm correct. So there was a lot of, that's a long-winded way of saying there was a lot of excitement around Jalen McMillan heading into his college career. And he did do well early on, and then he struggled in 2022 with injuries. So he was somebody who kind of had fallen down, I think, in consensus Devy rankings. And then even this year in 2023, he didn't play the full season with injuries. But when you watch his tape, you're going to see a really well-rounded wide receiver. I think for me, he's the prototypical flanker wide receiver in an NFL offense. You're going to see a sharp route runner. You're going to see somebody who gets through his routes very well. He wins against press coverage. He wins nicely off the line of scrimmage, sticky hands. He reacts well to off-target passes, and he doesn't lose concentration running through traffic, which I think is something really important, especially when you're thinking about a flanker wide receiver. Can they consistently work over the middle of the field? Jalen McMillan was able to do that. We talked about Michael Penix. One of the big knocks on Michael Penix is that he loses a lot on his ball when he throws it over the middle of the field. McMillan was able to be comfortable going up and getting that ball. He was comfortable holding on through contact as well. So for a guy who's 6'1", 197, he does have pretty good play strength to him. And he's also a twitchy runner after the catch. He moves well laterally. He closes space well. So I think Jalen McMillan is falling by the wayside because you can't watch his tape and identify one elite trait. But if you watch his tape, it's hard to find a flaw in his game too. So he's somebody who, if you're sitting there and if he makes it to you in the 4th round of rookie drafts, the back end, 3rd round of rookie drafts, he's somebody that I would definitely be scooping up. His ADP definitely could take a jump. There's a lot of chatter about him making it into day 2 of the NFL draft. I think in this class, that feels like a reach because it's so strong. You put him in last year's class, I think he could have gone day 2. I think he ends up being an early day 3 selection, like a round 4 selection. And I do think it's going to, catch a lot of folks' attention. And then I have Jalen Polk just a little bit lower than McMillan in my rankings. Again, another guy who I think in the 3rd round is going to be a 3rd round of your rookie drafts is going to be a justified pick. He's a short-handed wideout. He displays that ability to win both underneath and deep field. He'll bring in anything thrown off target. So again, Jalen Polk was actually another guy, just like I mentioned with Odunze. I went back and I watched more Washington tape and I bumped him up after watching that Michael Penix tape. I think I got a real appreciation for how Polk is able to adjust to the ball when thrown off target, adjust in midair, bring in that ball with sticky hands. And he's a quick and fluid athlete. He displays really good short area quickness. What you'll hear with Polk a lot is folks call him a 70% or like a diet Odunze, which I don't feel like is a fair comparison. He's his own guy. But I think the argument here is that you could see Odunze as an X receiver, where I think Polk, similar to McMillan, is probably more suited to be a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3 in the NFL offense. But what I would remind folks too is sometimes it could be better to have the wide receiver 2 in an NFL offense, right? If they're not drawing that top coverage, if that fits their skill set. So both Polk and McMillan, I think, are very much, good targets in that mid to late 3rd round. I would take McMillan over Polk, but it's definitely a user preference.
It's interesting always to hear some of the names. When we talk, Shawn, sometimes about the dynasty strategy and people moving those picks sometimes, as an afterthought almost in trades, and there will be players again this year, as there has been available in the past, that will be interesting in those zones. There's a number of players that are, gaining some steam or have had steam and are popular, both with the NFL community and with the fantasy football community over the last number of months. But they are, and I think you hinted at this earlier in the show, the production has come either in 1 year or maybe even less than a full season. So 1 year or almost 0 year or 0.5 year wonders at this particular point, the likes of a Roman Wilson, Legette, you have Pearsall in there. And then the one that keeps coming up, I'll put a question on some of our YouTube videos when we do the draft content of who do you want to hear us talk about? And lad McConkey comes up an awful lot. Out of those sort of names, maybe there's a couple of them, but whose game translates best to the NFL level?
Yeah, when you're looking at guys who only produced for 1 year or not even hitting thresh marks, for me, it's all about that context. And, you look at Roman Wilson. I'm a big fan of Roman Wilson. He's the highest ranked on my board right now compared to the 4 names that you just listed off. I think that Roman Wilson, relative to the Michigan offense, actually had pretty impressive production. So I think what folks don't realize about the Michigan offense is not only is it a run-first offense, but the passing game will often go through the tight ends before it goes to the wide receivers. So relative to wide receiver production, I thought Roman Wilson was really good. And the reason he was good is because he's got great speed. He accelerates well, but he moves fast laterally. In addition to that, I think he wins at all 3 levels of the field. He separates. He's got sharp footwork. I think he gets through his routes well. He'll shake defensive backs really consistently. And these are Big Ten defensive backs, so he's definitely drawing top coverage in that Michigan offense. And for a guy who's 5'10", 185, I thought he showed really good vertical ability too. Really good off-target ability, being able to go up and get that ball. He has great control over his body along the sideline. So he's somebody that's going to be interesting because he played along the boundary at Michigan. I'm sure they'll move him inside into the slot at the NFL level. So he'll be able to, hopefully, work along that seam and be productive doing that. And then you look at a guy like Lad McConkey, and again, you're going to go back to that Georgia rationale, right? The other thing that goes into Lad McConkey, besides the fact that, the Georgia game goes through the running backs, then it goes through Brock Bowers, and then it goes to wide receivers, is McConkey has struggled to keep himself healthy. That's the biggest thing for him. But I like McConkey's game a lot. He's explosive off the line of scrimmage. He separates really well. He's got really nice hands. He works really well underneath in creating separation right off the line of scrimmage. I do think that's primarily where he's going to get targeted at the next level. But if he's able to get some targets downfield, I think best case scenario is a Josh Downs season, right? You look at Josh Downs' rookie season, primarily used underneath, but definitely got targeted downfield as well, and was really, really productive in points per game. Of course, I think he only ended up playing 12 games. So that's why he's not getting quite enough hype. Ricky Pearsall, another guy, you're going to have to choose tape over production for him, but the Florida offense was garbage. Relying on Graham Mertz as your quarterback one is a suspect position. And then Ricky Pearsall also had a really, he hung around at Arizona State longer than he should have in the fallout of the Herm Edwards era. Jaden Daniels was throwing touchdown passes to Ricky Pearsall as freshman at Arizona State. So we've come a long way since then. But another guy who's explosive off the snap, which is definitely the reason I think folks are catching on, but creates separation really consistently. The guy who I want to like, that last name you mentioned, Xavier Legette, I want to like him so much, but it's harder to justify the context of that offense. He's had Spencer Rattler for 2 years. He didn't do it last year with him. He's got awesome athleticism, awesome contested catch ability. But when he came in at that Senior Bowl measurement, he ended up coming in 6'1" instead of 6'3.5", which is what he was listed at South Carolina. It's a little bit more difficult to justify that contested catch ability. So, he's the one I'm personally battling with because I want to rank him higher than I actually can at this point.
And then for long-term upside, I assume based on what you said there, you're leaning to Wilson as well, longer term, and probably with McConkey second.
Yeah, I would say Wilson. And then I would put McConkey and Pearsall in very similar ranges. I really think both of those guys can do well. It's about who's going to get the volume, which feels like a cop-out answer. But I think if we're being realistic, that's what we're looking at with slot wide receivers, right? Like, who can we project some real volume to?
You had mentioned the injuries for McConkey. When we're talking about guys like Mitchell, McMillan, McConkey, who have had those injuries, when we're talking about injuries, do we have lingering concerns for any big name prospects? And do we have maybe an additional name outside of those players where injuries have obscured what they're going to be at the NFL level?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that with any of these guys, there's long-term injury concerns. For me, the way that I approach injury is my general rule is I let the NFL tell me what I need to know. So that's going to reflect in draft capital, right? A lot of folks expect Ladd McConkey to be a top 50 pick. If he slides to the back end of day two, if he ends up going in the third round, it's probably because he was taken off the board for injury concerns, right? The same thing with Jalen McMillan. I expect him to be a fourth round pick. If he goes in the seventh, that's an area where I'm not going to double down on my takes. I will double down on takes. I loved Puka Nacua last year. He went in the 6th round. I doubled down on that take. I ended up with like 90% exposure to him. That was fantastic, right? But when there's a situation,
congratulations on all your championships.
Yeah, exactly. He was a big piece of that. So then when you look at, a guy like, McMillan or McConkey, if they slide, I won't double down on them. I'll back off of them. I'll pivot. So, I don't pretend to be an injury expert. And really what it comes down for me is we don't know what those medicals showed in Indianapolis. Draft capital will reflect that for us. So I'm going to default to the NFL in that category.
Now, as we finish up here on wide receivers, we've got a group of players who might be less familiar to a lot of listeners, and maybe they're irrelevant, but maybe they're not. Looking at guys like Corley and Thrash, Malik Washington, Christian McCaffrey's little brother, you have Ryan Flournoy, some guys who have tested in interesting ways, some guys who have interesting production, some guys who are, sort of yak guys underneath. How do you see these players translating? Maybe who is the guy or guys that, have a backstory that we need to know about as we do the rest of our preparation?
Yeah, I'm so glad to see Jamari Thrash on a show sheet. Nobody wants to talk about Jamari Thrash, but I'm a big fan. I've actually got him in my rankings right next to Ricky Pearsall, who we just talked about. So I think he's going to be a really nice value in the third round of your rookie drafts. Thrash, for me, he's a twitchy athlete, and he wins with an array of tools. He separates off the line of scrimmage. He's got sharp footwork. He's got speed. He doesn't have the biggest catch radius, but he's got really reliable hands, and he catches everything thrown his way. He's quicker than he is fast in terms of the way that he's able to navigate fluidly around the field. And if you want to talk about the context, and the last thing I'll mention about his tape too is he's 5'11", 188, but he can take a hit. He holds onto the ball through contact. But when you're looking at his profile, super productive guy at the group of 5 level. In his final season at Georgia Southern, I believe he goes over 1,200 yards, if I'm remembering correctly. And then he transfers up to Louisville. It's a pretty big jump on paper. And he immediately steps in and becomes the X wide receiver in the Louisville offense. A Louisville offense, folks, that went to the ACC championship game with Hudson Card at quarterback. So I think he was putting a lot of that offense on his back and was super productive, led the team in touchdowns, led the team in receptions and receiving yards. So for me, Thrash's profile is really exciting. He's always produced at the level, and he's always been the wide receiver on an offense when he's asked to be. Then the other guy whose background, I think does help explain his level of production is Malik Washington out of Virginia. Spends 4 seasons at Northwestern and then transfers to Virginia. I mean, it's nice that he's walking away with those 2 degrees, but not exactly the names of the football programs that you're looking for, right? So at Virginia, I should say, he needed to be the guy. And when he needed to be the guy, he absolutely tore it up. Quick feet, closes space very well. He is going to really work the underneath of the field. I think he's a true slot receiver. I think he's primarily going to work the bottom of the route tree in the NFL. But in a high volume offense, I think Malik Nabers could be a really valuable selection in probably the 4th round of your rookie drafts.
So a few of these guys are going to be 24 as NFL rookies. That's a huge concern for me. At the same time, I've made the case that we do have to look at this class a little bit differently because so much of what they were trying to do, especially at the beginning when they're trying to establish themselves, is interrupted by the pandemic. Any thoughts on kind of how that works when we're looking at the trajectory of some of these players who, transferred for a final season when they were already old?
Yeah, I don't factor age overly into my analysis. I think it's really, like you said, it's about the context. I think we will be dealing with this for a few years now, not only COVID, but NIL incentivizing these guys to hang around for an extra year. I do think it's worth taking a pause and asking questions why, right? So a guy like Bucky Irving, I like Bucky Irving's tape, but he stayed around for that extra year, at Oregon. I think it was 2 years at Oregon after 3 years at Minnesota, and he finally put together good tape. And so you're excited about him. And then he goes to the combine and he doesn't test well at the combine. So then the flags start to add up to me, right? That's what I'm more concerned about. Age is one, yellow flag that can pop up. It's not going to eliminate my interest in any particular player.